There are objects museums refuse to display. Not because they're cursed. Not because they're dangerous. But because no one can explain what they do. Most disappear into climate-controlled storage, catalogued with bland descriptions and forgotten by everyone except the conservators responsible for preserving them. Lucas Mercer had spent 15 years restoring priceless works of art. Paintings, sculptures, ancient manuscripts. If history could be repaired, he repaired it. He believed every object told a story. He had no idea some objects remembered them. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The client refused to identify himself over the phone. His assistant simply offered a figure that made Lucas stop writing. It was nearly 3 times his normal commission. "There are conditions," the assistant said. Lucas smiled. "There usually are. You must work at the client's residence." "Fine. You cannot photograph the object." "Unusual, but manageable." "And whatever happens." The voice hesitated. "Do not remove it from its room." Lucas laughed softly. "What is it?" A long silence. An empty frame. Ashcombe Manor stood alone beyond miles of neglected woodland. The mansion had once belonged to one of the country's wealthiest collectors. Now ivy climbed its stone walls, and most of its windows remained dark even in daylight. The butler who greeted Lucas looked exhausted. Not old. Simply worn. He introduced himself as Mr. Hargreaves and led Lucas through endless halls lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow them. "You'll be working in the East Gallery. Does the owner live here?" "He did." Lucas frowned. "He passed away 6 months ago." "Then who's paying me?" "The estate." The East Gallery contained dozens of masterpieces covered with protective cloth. Only one object remained uncovered. An ornate picture frame nearly 5 feet tall. It stood upright upon an antique easel beneath a skylight. There was no painting, no canvas, no glass, only empty space. The frame itself was extraordinary. Dark walnut carved with twisting vines, ravens, and tiny human figures that appeared to emerge from the wood itself. Gold leaf shimmered faintly within every carved detail despite decades of neglect. Lucas circled it slowly. "The frame needs restoring." Hargreaves nodded. "Only the frame. What happened to the painting?" "There never was one." Lucas examined the wood under magnification. No signs of nails. No mounting brackets. No residue from stretched canvas. Nothing suggested a painting had ever occupied the center. It had been built. Empty. He looked at Hargreaves. "Who made it?" "No one knows." "How old is it?" "The records stop around 1780. "Where did it come from?" "The records stop there too." Before leaving, Hargreaves paused at the doorway. "There are 3 house rules." Lucas smiled politely. "I'm listening." Never cover the frame. Odd. Never turn it toward a mirror. Stranger. And he swallowed. If you ever think you see someone standing inside it, walk away. The door quietly closed. Lucas spent the afternoon cleaning centuries of dust from the carved wood. The craftsmanship amazed him. Every tiny figure along the frame seemed unique. No repeated patterns. No identical faces. Someone had devoted years to creating it. By sunset, fatigue settled into his shoulders. He packed away his tools and prepared to leave. As he crossed the gallery, movement caught the corner of his eye. Someone had just walked past the frame. Lucas turned immediately. Nothing. Only the empty opening. He laughed under his breath. Long day. His guest room overlooked the neglected gardens. Rain tapped steadily against the windows. Around midnight he wandered downstairs for coffee. Passing the East Gallery, he noticed light inside. He stepped through the doorway. Moonlight poured through the skylight. The frame stood exactly where he'd left it. Empty. Then, a faint silhouette appeared within it. Not reflected. Standing. A man wearing a long dark coat. His back turned. Perfectly still. Lucas froze. "Hello." The figure slowly began turning. Lucas blinked. The frame was empty again. Morning brought logic, poor lighting, fatigue, peripheral vision. His scientific mind supplied a dozen reasonable explanations. He returned to work. As he cleaned another carved section, he discovered tiny writing hidden beneath layers of dirt. Not Latin, not French, English, just 3 words. Look only once. That afternoon he asked Hargreaves about the inscription. The butler's face lost all color. You found it. You knew it was there. No. His hands trembled. I prayed no one ever would. Lucas pressed further. What exactly is this thing? Hargreaves stared toward the gallery. My grandfather served this house. So did my father. So have I. Every caretaker eventually sees someone inside the frame. What happens then? They stop looking. That answer bothered Lucas more than any ghost story. The second night he prepared a camera. Not to photograph the frame directly, only the room. If something appeared, he wanted proof. He positioned the camera opposite the gallery before midnight. Then waited. Nothing happened. At 2:13 a.m., a loud crack echoed through the mansion. The lights flickered. Lucas hurried toward the gallery. The camera still pointed exactly where he'd left it. Its recording light blinked steadily. The frame remained empty. Then, a little girl ran across the opening, laughing. She couldn't have been older than 8. She disappeared beyond the opposite side. Lucas rushed into the gallery. There was nowhere to hide. No adjoining room. Only solid walls. He reviewed the recording. The gallery remained completely empty. No child. No movement. Only Lucas himself running into frame seconds later. That evening curiosity overcame caution. He stood directly before the empty frame. I'm looking. Silence. If you're trying to show me something. Show me. Nothing. Minutes passed. He almost turned away. Then the gallery disappeared. The empty opening no longer revealed the wall beyond. Instead, he found himself looking into another room. A richly decorated library. An elderly gentleman sat reading beside a fireplace. Lucas recognized him instantly. Victor Ashcombe, the mansion's late owner. The old man looked frightened. Not at Lucas. At something behind him. Ashcombe slowly lifted his eyes, looking directly through the frame. Directly at Lucas. His lips moved, though no sound came. He formed only 2 words. Don't restore. The library suddenly went dark. A hand emerged from the shadows behind Ashcombe. It settled gently upon his shoulder. The vision vanished. The frame became empty once more. Behind Lucas, someone whispered, "He saw you." Lucas spun around. The gallery was empty. Except, the carved wooden figures around the frame no longer appeared identical to those he'd cleaned that morning. One of them looked exactly like Victor Ashcombe. Lucas barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Victor Ashcombe's terrified expression frozen inside the frame. Not because he had been dying, because he had been trying to warn someone. The words echoed endlessly. Don't restore. By sunrise, Lucas had convinced himself he would finish the commission, collect his payment, and leave Ashcombe Manor forever. But the frame had other plans. The following morning he noticed something impossible. Another carved figure had appeared along the lower corner of the frame. A woman holding a lantern. He hadn't restored that section yet. He checked the photographs he'd secretly taken before beginning his work. The figure wasn't there. Neither was Victor Ashcombe. The carvings were changing. Lucas confronted Hargreaves. You've seen this happen. The old butler stared at the frame without answering. Finally he nodded. It adds them. What do you mean? The people it keeps. Lucas frowned. People. My grandfather counted 43. My father counted 70. I stopped counting years ago. Who are they? The owners. Lucas looked back toward the frame. Every person who tried to possess it became part of it. He demanded access to the estate archives. Reluctantly, Hargreaves unlocked a forgotten study beneath the mansion. Dust-covered ledgers filled towering shelves. Property records, auction receipts, private correspondence. One leather journal belonged to Victor Ashcombe himself. Lucas opened the final entries. The frame never contained a painting. It paints endings. Every owner believes they can preserve it. In truth, it preserves us. The last page contained only one sentence. I finally understand why it must always remain empty. That evening Lucas noticed something else. The empty opening no longer reflected the gallery behind it. Instead, it reflected his workshop. Not the room he stood in. His own restoration studio back in the city. Except, someone was inside, searching through his desk drawers. Lucas leaned closer. The stranger slowly turned. It was Lucas, only older. His hair streaked with gray. A deep scar crossed his forehead. The older Lucas looked exhausted. He stared directly through the frame, then quietly shook his head, as if begging him not to continue. The vision disappeared. Unable to resist, Lucas placed his hand inside the frame. He expected to touch empty air. Instead, his fingertips brushed cold stone. He jerked backward. The gallery floor remained beneath his feet. Yet inside the frame, there had been another room. That night the mansion filled with strange sounds. Not footsteps, conversations. Hundreds of distant voices whispered somewhere beyond the walls. Lucas followed them back to the East Gallery. The frame glowed faintly beneath the moonlight. Its opening no longer stood empty. People filled it, dozens of them, standing silently in darkness. None moved, none blinked. They simply watched. Every face carried the same expression. Desperate. Then one of them stepped forward. Victor Ashcombe. He raised a trembling hand. Not toward Lucas. Toward the space behind him. Lucas turned. Nothing. When he looked back, Victor had vanished. In his place stood a young woman dressed in 19th century clothing. She pressed both hands against the invisible barrier. Her lips formed silent words. Lucas couldn't hear them, but he understood. Run. The mansion lights suddenly failed. Darkness swallowed everything. Only the frame continued glowing. The whispers became louder. Not frightening. Pleading. Dozens of voices speaking over one another. Don't finish. Leave. Break it. Before Lucas could react, the emergency lights flickered on. The frame stood empty again. At dawn he packed his equipment. He didn't care about the money anymore. The frame could rot exactly where it stood. As he lifted his toolbox, he noticed fresh restoration work along the upper corner. Perfectly polished. Beautifully repaired. He hadn't done it. Yet someone had. Overnight, Hargreaves found him in the hallway. Leaving. Immediately. The old butler smiled sadly. They all say that. Lucas stopped. What do you mean? They all. Hargreaves opened another ledger. Inside were dozens of names. Every conservator hired during the past 2 centuries. Each had arrived intending to restore the frame. None had completed the commission. Yet every restoration had somehow progressed. Little by little. Generation after generation. As though the frame repaired itself. Using whoever touched it. Lucas drove away before sunset. The mansion disappeared behind endless trees. For the first time in days, he felt safe. 3 weeks later he returned to work at the museum. Everything seemed normal. Until a colleague asked an innocent question. When did you start restoring antique furniture? Lucas laughed. I restore paintings. His co-worker looked confused. No, you've always specialized in wood restoration. Lucas smiled uncertainly. No, haven't I? The uncertainty spread. Clients remembered different conversations. Old invoices described projects he'd never accepted. His professional portfolio slowly changed. Not dramatically, just enough to make him question his own memory. One evening he opened a storage cabinet. Inside sat a small carved wooden ornament. He didn't remember bringing it home. It depicted a tiny empty picture frame. The craftsmanship matched the one at Ashcombe Manor perfectly. Over the following weeks, more carvings appeared. On bookshelves, desk corners, picture frames, even the legs of his dining table. Always tiny, always intricate, always depicting people. At first strangers, then friends, co-workers, family. Finally, one morning he walked past the mirror in his hallway. Something caught his attention. Not his reflection. The wooden mirror frame. A new carving had appeared overnight. A man holding restoration tools. His posture looked familiar. Lucas leaned closer. The tiny figure possessed his face. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered automatically. A calm voice spoke. Mr. Mercer. Yes. We recently acquired an unusual antique from a private estate. Lucas felt a coldness settle through his chest. We were told. You're the finest frame conservator in the country. Silence. Then, we'd like you to restore it. The line disconnected. Months later, Ashcombe Manor finally sold. The estate auction attracted collectors from around the world. Every room was emptied. Every painting removed. Every piece of furniture catalogued. Except one. The enormous empty frame remained standing alone beneath the gallery skylight. Auctioneers repeatedly listed it. No buyer ever completed payment. Every contract somehow fell through. Eventually the frame was quietly placed into storage. Officially, it no longer exists. Yet every few years, an experienced conservator receives an unusually generous commission. The instructions never change. Do not photograph it. Do not move it. Do not turn it toward a mirror. And if you ever see someone standing inside, walk away, because the frame has never wanted a painting. It has always been searching for the next person to remember. Thanks for watching. Follow Story Hub Central for more exciting stories.